Hi, I'm Jacci Smith. I'm the Ag and Natural Resource Educator and the 4-H Educator in Delaware County. And today we're going to talk to you about how to get started raising sheep. So first, we're going to have to ask some questions about why do you want to get into this? Why do you want to start raising sheep? Does it come down to money? Does it come down to a hobby? You know, if it comes down to money, are you wanting to make a living at it? Are you wanting to produce some side income? Or are you just doing it because you want to have some fun or it's a hobby? When we talk about type, you know, do you already know what type you want to raise? Do you know that you want to raise breeding sheep for a seed stock? Do you know that you want to do club lambs? Do you know if you just want some random sheep out on your pasture field? Or maybe you just want some commercial use. Maybe you want to start a dairy and have dairy sheep and raise some feeder lambs as well. So there's also, we got to think about what your purpose and your why when we talk about type as well. Maybe you understand or know what you want for your end product. You know, are you trying to actually sell some lamb meat? Are you trying to sell wool? Are you trying to sell milk and cheese? Or maybe you're trying to sell live animals for other people to show or for yourself to show, or maybe even for other people's breeding stock. So once we have some answers to your purpose questions of why are you doing this and what your outcome is, you want your outcome to be, then we can start talking about items to consider, right? So we have location, we have the breed of sheep that you might want to raise, we have facilities that we need to talk about, we have equipment, nutrition, veterinarian care, and relationships and resources that we all need to consider. When we talk about location, first it's really important that you know what you want to sell. So this is where we really need to have the answer to that end product. Location is going to determine a lot of those availabilities and marketabilities of that end product. And if you're willing to transport a long distance, then it doesn't matter what your location is, truly. However, we do want to be sure that we're keeping that transportation costs in the back of our mind as well. When we talk about Ohio, we do have fairly good lamb markets here in Ohio that we can sell to. So it's very fantastic that we have those availabilities and those locations available to us. When we talk about location, we also want to be sure that that location that we have can house the proper facilities that you're going to need. Once again, this comes back to the type you're going to raise and the amount you're going to raise. Next, the availability of feedstuffs and a water source is also very important. Be sure that you're getting somewhere close that you can, once again, get to that feed mill and lower those transportation costs as much as possible. Some of us have seasonably high water tables here in Ohio, but some of us don't and have to have more city water piped in. So we want to be sure that you're keeping that in mind as well when you're selecting your location. Another good thing to keep in mind is that we need to have availability for bedding. Our animals that do have shelter of some kind will definitely need some sort of bedding. So we want to be sure that you have a location that is close to having that available to you as well. So next we're going to talk about the breeds of sheep that you might raise. So there's lots of different breeds out there, and I definitely strongly suggest that you go research them. And this comes back to kind of the type that you want to produce, right? So if we want to produce commercial flock or a club lamb flock, then maybe we're not so specific on what breed we want. However, if you're a breeding sheep producer and you're a purebred seed stock producer, there's a vast majority that you can pick from and specialize in. Ohio is a leader in multiple different breeds of breeding sheep when we're talking about them specifically. But when we think about it in the long term and the big scheme of things, in general, white-faced sheep have more mothering instinct and are more maternal. And black-faced sheep, in general, are more terminal and have more meat characteristics about them. There's obviously other kinds and other colors of sheep out there. Here you can see the Tunis sheep that are red. So we do have other breeds out there that are more dual purpose, that do both wool and mothering sides as well as some meat characteristics. So we want to be sure that we're keeping that in mind when we're selecting our breeds. In the club lamb industry, their very sole focus is meat and muscling. So we want to be sure that you're looking into more of those black-faced breeds and even crosses of those. Commercial flocks will normally have more of a white-faced mothering side of the ewes and will have some black-faced rams so that their offspring can cross and have a nice hybrid vigor. Hybrid vigor is when you cross two different breeds and you get the best of both worlds. Commercial flocks in general will have a white-faced ewe base, This will get them those mothering characteristics when those lambs are born. Those ewes will have good milk and good mothering instinct to try and take care of those lambs. And they'll outcross those ewes onto a black-faced buck so that their offspring are sellable and a good marketable product. If you're looking into the dairy industry, the big dairy breed here in the United States is East Friesians. That's really the only main one that we have. The issue with them is that they actually are fairly fragile. So there's a lot of crossbreeding when we're talking about dairy industries, just so we can have a little bit of an outcross in there to hardy up those lambs and hardy up those ewes so that they're not as fragile as we go through. But we still want some of that East Friesian influence in there to increase our milk quality and our milk production. There's also a whole industry out there of hair sheep. These are sheep that do not grow wool and they will shed it. So the advantage of not having wool is that you don't have to pay the shearer to come out and shear them. They're also very hardy in other scenarios. In high heat climates, they do very well. The next section we're going to focus on is your facilities. So a big question is, how many sheep do you want, right? So the size of your facility will definitely determine how many ewes you can have, or vice versa. If you know how many ewes you want, then you have to decide how big your facility. As you can see, here are some space requirements for the animals that we have, anywhere from young lambs all the way through ewes with lambs. When we're talking about facilities, we also need to talk about different types of feeders, right? So feeders, we have to have somewhere that we can feed these animals. At least one point during a sheep's year cycle, they will at least need some sort of grain supplement, mainly during lactation. When we're talking about feeders, we always want to have a good rough estimate of about 1 foot per ewe that has feeder space. It can range anywhere from 9 inches to 20 inches, but if we kind of average that 12 inches area, then we can have a good estimate and we have some good sizing requirements. You want to be sure that you have ample water troughs and an ample water supply as well for your ewes. Ewes can consume a different amount of water throughout their year, whether they're in maintenance, gestation, or lactation. So we want to be sure that you have ample water troughs and ample space at the water troughs for them to drink. You want to be sure that you have enough gates and fencing for your flock, as well as lambing pens. When your ewes will lamb, you'll want to pen them up, the mother and the lambs, for 1 to 3 days to get that bonding that they need. A good rule of thumb is that you need about 1 lambing pen for every 10 head of ewes. That way you have enough to rotate through your cycle. Another key facility that you'll need is transportation. At one point in time, you will have to be able to transport your lambs one place or another, whether that be to someone else's place to go get bread, or maybe from one flock to another flock, one pasture to another pasture, or when it's ready to take your lambs to market, you'll need to be able to have some transportation of some sort. So maybe a trailer, or you can always put something in the back of your pickup as well and lift them in there to transport them together. When it comes down to it, when we talk about shelter, we want to be sure it's well ventilated. Be sure that there's a nice breeze able to get through the barn, that the barn stays as clean and as dry as possible. This will help immensely when we're talking about disease control. Some equipment that you can't live without, something that you'll definitely need when you're raising sheep. Hoof trimmers. Ewes will need their hoofs trimmed at least once a year, up to 3 times a year. And some ewes can be problems that might need more often hoof trimmings. Other items that you'll need are syringes and needles. You'll never know when you'll have to give a shot to an animal to make them healthier or just get them through that disease process. A dose syringe is another item that is definitely needed. This is so that you can drench your ewes or whatever sick animal you have with some medicine to make them better. Something that everyone should have, whether they're in the show circuit or not, is a trimming stand, maybe referred to as a blocking stand. This is so that you can put one animal up there and deal with that animal specifically. These are very beneficial, especially if you're going to be working by yourself. It has control of the animal the whole time. As you can see, you have a strap that you can put around the back of the animal's head, and it controls their head while you are able to work on the animal's body if needed. If you're into the breeding sheep or the club lambs, then you're going to need some show supplies, and some of those are more specific to each of those categories, and I suggest you do some research into those as you have answered your questions early on if you know what type of animal you want to raise. Something that everyone will need are lambing time supplies. So at minimum, we're going to need bottles in case we have bottle lambs. We're going to need OB sleeves and lube in case we have any dystocias or difficult births that we need to deal with. as well as ear tagging equipment, tattoo equipment, whatever your identification form is, you'll need that equipment. Tail banding and castration equipment as well. Our next category is nutrition. When we talk about nutrition, we talk about the nutrition as a whole. So maybe not just the grain side, or maybe not just the hay or roughage or pasture side. We kind of talk about it as a whole. As you can see here, we've got multiple different dry matter intakes that are required and crude protein levels that are required at different stages of each of these animals' lives. Large animal veterinarians are very hard to find these days, let alone small ruminant or sheep veterinarians specifically. So we want to be sure that you find a veterinarian that you have a good relationship with. Maybe you can even teach them something if they're not specifically a sheep vet. Get a good relationship and work with them as much as possible. Talk through even small problems on the phone with them. Most times they don't even charge you for these. You also want to work with them on a whole flock plan. Maybe that's your vaccination programs or your deworming schedules. We want to be sure that they're involved in a lot of these decisions and understand what you do for management on your flock. We want to be sure that you give a little bit of heads up to your veterinarian when it gets closer to lambing time. This is a big time and a big complicated area where we could have a lot more vet calls. The last one we're going to talk about is relationships and resources. My best advice is to find a good mentor. Get somebody else out there who's been in the industry for a little bit of while and can share some of that very valued knowledge and experience that they have. Be sure to lean on OSU Extension. There's a Sheep Team website, and there's a weekly blog post that goes out with all new sorts of information that we can provide to you. There's also recorded webinars specifically about lambing, nutrition, and calling that you can even go reference on that website as well. Key relationship that we need to continue to talk about is that veterinarian. We want to be sure that we include them in a lot of our decision making and have them understand how we want our flock to be raised. Another good relationship that we need to keep in mind is our shearer. We want to be sure that we have that contact information and are able to set up some dates so that they can come and shear our flock. Or if you want to be able to learn how to shear, we want to be sure you have a good enough relationship with your shearer to begin with to be taught. We need to have a good relationship with our marketer. We need to understand what type of animals they want and how best we can provide those to them. A great resource is the ASI Sheep Handbook. Don't be intimidated. It's 800 pages. However, it is very, very useful. As you can see, I've got multiple different flags on my book, and I use it frequently. Anywhere from birthing difficulties to nutrition to poisonous plants. This book has it all. Another great resource is the nutrient requirements for small ruminants. This one will break down exactly what you need for your nutrition and help you through. I hope this really helped you out on what you need to know and how to get started in raising sheep. Be sure to remember, answer those first big questions why of what your purpose is so you can get through and understand your items to consider. Thanks.